Hi, good evening. I'm Dr. Philip McMillan. Thank you for joining me. Every once in a while, I do an interview that is exceptionally important. And the one that was recently done with Professor Stabell Benn, who is a epidemiologist. She's into vaccines, primarily live vaccines, and the research that she had done about unintended consequences is I cannot explain how significant this is. It's a very, very important interview for everyone to look at. And so part of what I'm doing here is I am pushing the fact that I want you to reflect on what she said. The link is in the description below, and so you can watch the full interview there. But I'll play a short clip as to what she said with regards to vaccines and children, specifically around COVID vaccines. And the reason this stands out to me is because I remember what the discussions were early in the pandemic with regards to what was the focus and the attention on children and whether or not they should be vaccinated. Now, a lot of people have short memories. And what I've done is I've got a clip as well from Matt Hancock, who was the health minister in the UK at the time from November 2020, and what he said and why it seems that we went away from this very obvious question to do something that could have unintended consequences, as I've highlighted here. Before I go any further, I'd like to remind people that if you are interested in omega 3s, I did some specific work about omega 3s and the storm spike triggered autoimmune response mechanism and how omega 3s are essential to preventing that kind of damage. This is a very personal thing for me because omega 3s are something that I personally have as an important mechanism in my strategy. And so, if you want to learn more about it, please go to the landing page in the description. You will you join up the newsletter and you will be able to see a video that I did on it, plus more information. I think this is important and I want to bring people on that journey with me. Additionally, in the description, you will find links to the fact that I'm going to be doing more surgeries or clinics online where we talk about stuff that is relevant to you. There is a link. You put in what is important to you. I will look at how to talk about it. So look forward to that. So, getting back to this question of unintended consequences, and you have to understand that Professor Stabell Benn had been looking at this prior to the pandemic. She submitted her work to the WHO. They were doing research around it, but she was finding that there was a difference in terms of live vaccines and other vaccines and the impact this can have on the immune system. She was concerned even before the pandemic, but became very concerned when she saw the rollout in terms of what happened, especially in regards to children. Let me just show you here and remind you as to what one of our health ministers was saying early in the pandemic, and this is in November 2020. Listen to this here.
This vaccine will not be used for children. It hasn't been tested on children, and the reason is that the likelihood of children having significant detriment if they catch COVID-19 is very, very low. So this is an adult vaccine for the adult population.
So this is Sky News here that has shown us this. So this was a very important point, and this is what I think everybody knew at the time. Because if you think about it, when the vaccines rolled out, were you pushing children forward? No, it was the older grandparents with comorbidities, over 60 or 65. That was the target. And then suddenly it seemed to just evolve and start to go down the line. And I think the mistake there was that people thought, or politicians thought, that they could stop the pandemic by just vaccinating everybody in first world countries. That clearly was not the science because it couldn't stimulate mucosal immunity effectively. And so you then ended up in vaccine mandates, and the situation just escalated beyond that. But in relation to children, because at the moment this is still an action that is relevant to children, and I think therefore that what we need to do is listen very carefully to what Professor Stabell Benn has to say here, and then reflect carefully on what those relevant pieces of information are. Listen to what she had to say. Thinking as you were talking, I was reflecting on the children, especially because I remember thinking to myself, and I remember even in the UK when the health minister at the time absolutely said, no, there's no need to vaccinate children, because it really were, the risk was so tiny, almost zero, with a healthy child. You could argue for a child who has, other conditions. But when you think about these non-specific effects then, and these children are still at a phase where they're developing immunity, that is actually pretty serious in terms of longer term health risks.
I agree, and I wrote a piece already in 2021, in the summer of 21, in BMJ, asking the question whether COVID should be a vaccine disease or a childhood disease. And I was saying, we, as a society, it would be clearly best from all the data we have if children are infected when they are small and they develop natural immunity and they're boosted occasionally, and eventually when they become 80 years old, they might eventually with very high old age become susceptible to get severe COVID, but probably they would be well protected up until immunosenescence really kicks in a very high age. So we would have herd immunity through the children, and the children could have COVID without severe disease. And my concern was that we might actually interfere with that process of developing this good natural immunity that would protect them well into their old ages by giving vaccines early. And so therefore, I thought from a societal perspective, this was really better, but it would also probably be better for the children, and not least taking into account that we still didn't know anything about potential negative effects of the vaccines in the children. And just as I said with the young, healthy adults, etc., the equation was so clear that when you didn't get severe disease from COVID, you couldn't tolerate any negative effects from a vaccine. And what I'm now looking at, and what we recently published in a preprint, is concerning data that suggests that actually the mRNA vaccines in children made them more susceptible to other infections. It made them get at a higher risk of lower respiratory tract infections in general. And this was due to a higher risk, not least, of getting more RSV infections. And RSV, respiratory syncytial virus infections, are much more severe than COVID in childhood. So the trade-off might have been that they got the COVID vaccines. It might even not have protected them very well against COVID, but they became more susceptible through these effects on the innate immune system, among others, to other infections that were much more severe than COVID.
That is such an important conversation. As I said, please watch the full video. She goes into all aspects and she's very balanced. You have to remember, vaccines are her work, but she believes very strongly that only with honest discussion of the pros and the cons can we actually deal with the issues about vaccine mistrust. So it's a very balanced conversation, and one where she has found that live vaccines are certainly far more, or live attenuated vaccines are very, very good long term for building immune systems. And it's different from what we're seeing now with protein based, not protein based, but fragments of viruses and so on that can therefore cause longer term issues, making the immune system, as she said, almost more lazy. These are the non specific effects. And you have to remember that children are developing their immune system. And that immune system is then going to be, when it's matured, protect them throughout their life. So anything that can damage that or put that off track is actually quite significant and quite serious. Now, I don't know. I mean, there are many, many children across the world have already been vaccinated. So there's not necessarily any clear thing you can do about that. But it raises the point, as she had pointed out, of non-specific effects, because that was what her research was about. Not just looking at whether or not there was specific protection from a disease, but what was the impact on other diseases. And as she highlighted there, the information coming back from their research is that it is making children more prone to other viral infections. My view is that when I look at the science, the critical thing that is a problem around the COVID vaccines and recurrent COVID infection. So the two things go together. I think what has happened is that the initial vaccine did do priming of the immune system to focus on the original variant. So therefore, the mucosal immune system is not as effective. What then happens is on exposure, people are more likely to get infected. Once they get infected, people forget that the most significant strategy of this virus is interferon suppression. So, what it does is it suppresses the warning signal against viral infections. That's just how it works. It is exceptionally good at that. And so, therefore, when you have interferon suppression, you are therefore at risk for multiple other viral infections and some bacterial infections, like I think Streptococcus mycoplasma, that increases these risks because of interferon suppression. And so, in the context of childhood diseases, especially because we knew it was so mild in children, you have to ask whether or not that was an unnecessary gamble. People have to take responsibility for these decisions because, as I keep on making reference to the point, is that if it couldn't put complete protective immunity to a child where they wouldn't get infected, and even then they may actually still have had more or broader immunity from a natural infection because they had such small risks in terms of severe disease. If that has been interfered with, who accepts responsibility? That's always the question that I'm asking. Where is the responsibility if there are issues? Who takes the can for this kind of thing? So we do have huge challenges ahead of us. But again, I will encourage everyone, that interview, and the link is in the description, is one of those interviews I think everybody should watch, reflect on, because she's definitely not anti-vaccine. This is her work and her lifeblood, but she is very clear at the pros and the cons and where the gaps in knowledge are that need to be addressed. So I'd encourage everybody to take a listen to that full interview at the link below. Again, just a reminder before I finish, if you want to learn about omega 3s, this is one of my pet topics, something I feel very strongly about with regards to storm damage. Please, again, look in the description for the link to come to the landing page and join me in this journey about omega 3s and how important it is to balance the immune system and have an impact on microclotting. That's a whole different issue. So join us in this journey. We have a lot of work to do, a lot of thinking, and remember as well, share your ideas as to where we should focus our next presentation that will be coming up. It's likely to be about omega 3s in much more detail, but even beyond that, what is the focus? A lot of people have spoken about COVID complications and nutrition. And so I'm looking at ways to tie both things together so that it deals with how specific nutrition can impact on the complications we can see around COVID and the thrombotic issues in the long term. Have a great evening.